Today on Locked On Red Wings, Linus Ullmark would be a perfect long-term solution to Detroit's goalie woes.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm formerly of 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty's a host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, today we're going to talk to the people about a potential trade for Linus Ullmark. This is the first potential goalie trade we've talked about. I know last week we did a whole, just basically one episode on all the more notable free agent goaltenders on the market, and we got a couple comments asking about Ullmark, but we wanted to have and save that separate conversation for its own day because the Boston Bruins are so incredibly hard to predict. There's been a lot of news swirling about the potential for the Boston Bruins to move on from the 2023 Vezina winning goalie because they have another goaltender in the name of Jeremy Swayman, who is 25 years old, an RFA, and up for a new contract that could be worth a lot of money. So for their own cap implications and their own set cup window, it may make sense to move on from Linus Ullmark. Scotty, what's your take on the whole situation? Do we even think that Boston's going to actually do this?
Yeah, well, I think that is what makes this conversation unique to kind of the rest that we have been having, right? Obviously, the free agents are free agents, but even the other trade possibilities we've kind of thrown out there that we will continue to discuss. This is one of the first ones, at least this offseason, where there is a very real chance that this isn't even feasible. But I do think that it's very much still worth the conversation because of the potential implications and the fact that it's not out of the realm of possibility, right? It's kind of that fine line, which I guess gives Boston a little bit of leverage in these talks, which is where I'll start, right? Like the fact that they don't have to, quote unquote, is something that benefits the Bruins in negotiations, right? Like, oh, we have to be blown away by an offer. It has to be a slam dunk or whatnot for the Bruins to be able to pull trig on it. So I think, man, like, I mean, if you're asking me right now what I think I would lean towards no, and they would find a way to keep him and Swayman and keep that duo together, what is widely considered to be really not even much of a competition, the best goalie tandem in the NHL. I think that they like having that. These are guys that are also still like pretty young. Like these are guys, you know what I mean? Like it's not like either of these guys are like, oh, like, you know, this isn't going to last long term. No, they can, you know, have both of these dudes for a while. I think the biggest question mark surrounding it is when building a roster, do you want to legitimately pay two goalies? Is that worth it when you are roster constructing? Because on a pure talent level, they both deserve whatever contract they're going to get, even if it's not from the Bruins, right? No matter who they get paid by, it's going to be worth it. It just comes down to, and this is somewhat subjective, I feel like. I would love to know kind of like everybody's like own opinion on it. Like, is it worth when you're building a roster as good as the Bruins, albeit, right? Is it worth forking over legitimate money to two goalies?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. And I think the way I rationalize this, and I could be completely off base because I'm not Ian McLaren. I'm not the host of Locked On Bruins. Give him a listen if you want a little bit more in-depth thoughts on their cap situation. But it depends on if your goals are short-term or long-term if you're the Bruins general manager, in my opinion, because if you're looking short-term, you still have Linus Ullmark for one more year. You're going to pay Jeremy Swayman like he's an RFA, right? You could do what you did with Swayman last year and maybe give him another. They gave him a 1-year deal last year just to keep them both there, because we had this conversation, not us, but the hockey community had this conversation last year about this duo, because you have two goalies who can play 40-plus games, one who just won the Vezina, both like .925 save percentage goalies. Like, they're ridiculously good, each and every one of them, and you can get a king's ransom for either one, but they decided to play the short game, hold on, run it back. Do they want to do that again? Because if so, you hold on to Linus Ullmark. You try and I don't know what the RFA, and this is where, again, you should listen to the Locked On Bruins. I don't know the RFA situation with Jeremy Swayman is either. I don't know if one more year would take him to UFA status, and that's why they want to lock him up long-term now. But if you can keep him on another short-term deal and retain that team control, it might be smarter to run it back. But if you're looking at the long-term implications of trading away Linus Ullmark and your cup window, I think it may be better, because, again, I'm done trying to predict when the Bruins are going to fall off, because they just don't. You know, right as soon as I thought they were going to fall off, Pasternak and this goalie tandem burst onto the scene, and now they're just as dominant as ever. But if you're looking at the long-term solutions, I think that trading Ullmark might be in their best interest, because you can get a king's ransom for him, because you have a young 25-year-old goaltender in Jeremy Swayman, who has played umpteenth number of games these last couple of years. Like, this last year, he played 44 games, had a .916 save percentage, which is excellent for this year in which goaltending was down, and it really showed up in the playoffs with a .933 save percentage. He played 12 games in the playoffs this year and posted an unreal number. Like, they didn't lose that series because of Jeremy Swayman. So, like, you can... Linus Ullmark, who's still on has 1 year left on his deal, which is going to immediately raise his price because he has term left. You're not trading for an expiring contract. I mean, you are, but for next offseason, not like this July 1st. You can get a king's ransom for a Vezina-winning goaltender with 1 year left, and that will give you and if you're the Boston Bruins, you probably want guys who are close to the NHL level now with team control rather than draft picks that you have to develop. So that's why, like, Marty Necas has been thrown out there in proposed trades. Mangiapane for the Flames has been in conversations. Like, they want somebody who's established now that they can control, is under contract or is an RFA, and still be good and extend that cup window and add to your team in the process. And if you're the Boston Bruins and you're looking at long-term cup window eligibility, I think that is probably the smart play, is moving on from Ullmark. And I think that's why we're seeing so many of these trade proposals and news articles about the potential of moving on from Ullmark, because Swayman's going to have to be paid, and the fact that they have $20 million of cap space, but they have a lot of people they have to sign, or you would imagine they would want to re-sign, right? Like Jake DeBrusk is supposed to be a UFA this year. He's 27 years old. I would imagine that signing that top 6 winger would be a little bit more of a priority than re-signing one of your 2 excellent goalies if you already have one in the bank. You know what I mean? They also have Matt Grzelcyk, who, yes, is 30 years old, is going to be a UFA, but is a stellar defenseman. Like, there are guys that you would think that they would want to bring back, but again, I'm not covering that team as closely, so I don't know what the situation is. Like, if they wanted to bring Ullmark back, they could let those guys walk, and they could do it. But at the same time, if you already have Swayman, do you really need to bring Ullmark back? I feel like it's a luxury, not a necessity, to have 2 Vezina quality goaltenders, you know, when you can get a king's ransom for one of them.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is I guess it's technically not a necessity, but it's also something that's really freaking awesome to have.
Oh, it's a massive luxury. Yeah.
Right. But
is it worth
that the biggest question is, or not question, the biggest point is that one you made at the end, where, I mean, you would get a ridiculous haul for him. You would get, I mean, there's already some mocks out there where, like, Ottawa's going to give up Chikrin for him, right? Like, that's on the table plus more. I don't know. There's so many different factors with this one, but at the end of the day, it's within the realm of possibility for him to be traded. He's very much going to be in talks this summer, but also the Bruins don't necessarily need to either, and that makes for a mighty fine line.
Yeah, and so for the rest of this episode, we're going to be working under the assumption that, yes, they want to trade Linus Ullmark, and we're going to talk about a fit with the Detroit Red Wings, because we're Locked On Red Wings. That's what we do here in the offseason. We talk about hypotheticals on how this team could be better, because it's just fun. So stay tuned for that in segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about Policygenius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Their award-winning agents can even walk you through the process step by step. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs, or even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over the other, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance policy with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty and I are talking about a potential trade for Linus Ullmark. We talked in segment 1 about will Boston even trade him because they're so hard to predict. I feel like every time I make a prediction about that team, I'm just so incredibly off base by the end of the season. Now, if the Red Wings were to trade for Linus Ullmark, I think that it's pretty self-explanatory that the pros in this situation are absolutely massive. As we established in segment 1, this is a goaltender who has never once in his career had a sub-900 season. He had a .915 save percentage this year, a .938 save percentage last year in which he won the Vezina, .917, and before that when he was with the Buffalo Sabres, who have the longest playoff drought in the NHL currently, longer than the Detroit Red Wings. He had a .917, .917, .915, .905, .935. Well, that was just in 5 games, but you see my point. Right? He has a long history and a long track record of being a stellar goaltender. And my point in bringing up the Buffalo Sabres, Scotty, is to emphasize that that's not just the result of playing behind a very, very good team. He played behind some really bad Buffalo Sabres teams and still put up incredible numbers. So it's so self-explanatory when we're talking about Linus Ullmark that he's a Vezina winning goalie with a track record of consistent performance in the regular season. That, of course, you bring him into the Red Wings system, who have 2 goalies with 1 year left on their deal, just like Linus Ullmark, that he would immediately come in and make this team a million times better. And I honestly might be able to carry them into the playoffs. I don't want to make too much of but like that's one of the biggest needs with the Red Wings last season, right? We talk about it, their top 6 forward. They need to fix their defense. That's not as big of a priority as the top 6 forward issue, and it's not as big of a priority as the goaltending issue, which I think you stated was your number one problem going into the offseason, was their need for a goalie. Linus Ullmark is that solution, at least for 1 more year.
Yes, and again, I think that this is a similar conversation, I guess, we had to yesterday, but I would find it hard to believe that the Wings would, shovel over a ransom if they didn't have implications or knowledge that they were going to be able to extend him once they brought him in, right? I don't think they're looking for, again, like just going all in on next year and that's it. I think the plan would be to extend him long term, as it is with a lot of these guys. I also, it's worth noting that Ullmark has I believe 15-team no trade clause. So Correct. There is that's always fun, right? Like we're having this conversation. He might have the power to just completely, cut off a trade to the Red Wings for all we know. I'm not sure if the list of teams he has is public. I'd imagine it's not, but that was something that I know a lot of people at the trade deadline were talking about when, having these rumors and conversations with Ullmark. But yeah, on a pure talent basis, I mean, again, you already mentioned it. I talked a lot about the goalie situation already this summer. I'm going to continue to talk about it. I think it is the biggest thing that needs to be addressed in some capacity. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean going out and getting like one of the best goalies on the planet, right? But I'm certainly not opposed to it. Yeah, man, like you said, on a pure talent basis, this is not only just one of the premier goalies out there, but the Wings would put him in net for a lot of games, and he would presumably be a huge reason as to why they were able to get over the hump.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even you look at the other statistics, right? I was talking about how he has a track record of success even before the Boston Bruins. But like the Boston Bruins, while still being a very good hockey team this season, right? They weren't the dominant team we saw. They had the 11th most shot attempts against this season, and they had the 15th most at 5-on-5. And yet Linus Ullmark was still able to produce the amount of success that he had with a .915 save percentage, again, in a year where save percentages were down. So that .915 save percentage is really impressive, especially this season. His goals saved above expected was 8th best in the league. Again, that's a cumulative stat, so that builds as the season goes on. But by the end of the year, he had the 8th best goals saved above expected. In 41 games played, he had a 21.62. So if you believe at all in expected goals, he saved 21 more goals than he should have according to the expected goals metric. That's what expected goals saved above expected is. He's just a really freaking good goalie. And he's got one more year left on a really reasonable deal. And I agree with you, Scotty, when you said that I don't think the Red Wings would trade for a goaltender like Linus Ullmark without there being some kind of unwritten agreement that there's interest in an extension between the two parties. The only type of team that's going to blindly trade for a goalie like Linus Ullmark without the talks of there being an extension in place is a team that's desperate to win a cup before the cup window closes, right? Like, that's the only type of team that's like, we'll talk about it when we get there if we want to win a cup this year. Red Wings are in a different situation. It's like, we trade for you. We want you to be our long-term solution. And that's another one of the positives that Ullmark is. He's 30 years old, which some people might go, ooh, and shrug away at, 'cause you want to get, this team wants to get younger, like sub 30 if possible. But goalies' primes can be and tend to be longer. So a goalie like Linus Ullmark, if he stays healthy, can stay in his prime into his mid to late 30s. And with the fact, if you can manage to get an extension, that's a huge if, I understand. Like, there's a lot of ifs in this type of conversation that we're having. But if you can bring Linus Ullmark in, and if you can get him into a long-term extension, he's going to be your shutdown goalie for the foreseeable future. And if then you can, that allows you to allow Alex Lyon and Ville Husso, and James Armour's already probably going to be gone come July 1st, but then Husso and Lyon to walk next year, giving you the ability to bring up Sebastian Cossa, again, if he's ready, and kind of groom him into that role. You know, Linus Ullmark has played 40-plus games a season for the last 2 years. He's very capable of taking that 1A, 1B, and we talk about the fact that in the NHL, the modern NHL, you don't have that many goalies playing 60-plus games anymore. That just doesn't happen. So if Cossa can prove he's ready, you have Linus Ullmark up, and this is, again, an ideal situation. It could go all awry, but Linus Ullmark and Sebastian Cossa could be your tandem. You can afford to pay Linus Ullmark because you'll have Cossa under team control. He'll be the RFA, so you can afford to throw the money it's going to take to extend him. Like, there is a world where this all does work out perfectly, but I understand that world is a world of what ifs. But it's just the idea of that this team needs a stellar goalie, and do you really want to bank on Cossa or Augustine being the guy and just hope that they work out? Or do you want to bring in a guy you know can be the solution while still having the ability to watch and see if Cossa and Augustine work out themselves? Because then, honestly, you find yourself in a similar situation to Boston. What if Cossa does work out and he's an RFA and Ullmark is still really, really good a couple years down the line? Well, now you're in a situation where, again, you can then get a king's ransom for one of these goalies. But then I'm getting off into fantasy land. This is all hypothetical.
Yeah,
but I'm idealizing this situation where I'm like, this could really solve one of their biggest needs. It's just all, again, about cost to acquire him and cost to then retain him.
Yeah, the timelines of Cossa and Augustine do not overlap nearly enough for like there to be like you're gonna roadblock somebody type of concern. I wouldn't
even be concerned with that because we tandem everyone in the NHL these days.
No, for sure. I'm just saying, even if both of them, even if Cossa and Augustine are both unbelievable and incredible and 1A goalies, that doesn't overlap nearly long enough with
Right.
Ullmark's timeline. Like, he's going to be the 1A for the next however long you sign him for, 5 years, 6 years. And then, like Augustine is still levels away. He just played in college, like still a ways away from being in the NHL. Kosa is still, a year plus away from being like full-time NHL. Like, that's just not a concern. Yeah.
Right. And you talk about road blocking somebody, and that I mentioned it just a second ago, but like, it's not a concern of mine because you do this tandem situation. Plus this allows you don't throw Kosa into the fire, right? You're not like, okay, you're the starter. This allows him and gives him room to grow while you have Ullmark. So there is a situation where in a perfect world, again, I emphasize perfect world, this could solve one of Detroit Red Wings' biggest problems, and that's a net. But there's other things at play here too. Like, and again, he proved that he can do it with less than stellar teams. Again, the Boston Bruins weren't the same dominant possession team they used to be. They faced a lot of shots against, not even attempts, shots against this year. They were 11th worst. But in his time with Buffalo, right? So it's a team where I'm not super concerned or it's a player where I'm not super concerned where, this player was super sheltered with Boston and that's why his numbers look good. Like, no, he's done it before with bad teams. But like the Red Wings do still have to get better defensively, so maybe he's not. Because while Boston was 11th worst shot attempts against, Detroit was 8th worst. So with shots against. So there's still a world where the Red Wings still got to get better elsewhere, but this would be a huge shot. We're going to take another quick break, and when we return, we'll talk about cost to acquire him a little bit and cost to retain him, because I don't think either of those things are going to be cheap. So stay tuned for that on segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Let's talk to you guys today about FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and all you can bet on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who you think is going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Now, Scotty, the biggest question was that. Oh, because I clapped. Yeah,
you randomly did that to start your ad read, so now I'm just every segment I'm just clapping.
Right. We got a comment today. It's like, I don't come here for the Red Wings podcast. I come here for the bromance.
That's real. That's real.
Literally, they know we actually hate each other off air. This is just for the camera.
Yeah, for sure.
So the cost to acquire him, Scotty, this is where the hypotheticals go off the trains. I try not to be an NHL, EA Sports NHL GM where I'm just like increasing the value meter. And actually, historically, I've gone
on a third, and let's just get on our way.
We get rid of the guys we don't want while bringing in the guys we do want. Justin Hull and a 5th-round pick. Let's go.
Awesome.
No, but like seriously, realistically, in your mind, and if you got to remember what Boston may want in this situation, what do you think it would take to get this kind of goalie?
Yeah, I mean, the one kind of conversation, the one thing that we have to compare to this conversation is just other hypotheticals that have been put out there. I mentioned earlier Ottawa, and like Chychrun is someone who has been talked about quite a lot in a potential deal like that. Ottawa continuing to, try to bounce back and get back into kind of like the competitive window that they thought they were going to be in. That would obviously help them a lot. Then you have teams like the Devils, who had a really good year 2 years ago, had a really rough year this past season, and one of the biggest reasons why was they had zero stability in net. And there's a conversation that they'd be willing to move away from their top 10 pick in this year's draft in a deal that would land them Ullmark. So like, that's the price tag we're talking about. We're talking about premier defensemen. We're talking about top 10 picks in drafts. Like, this isn't like, right? Like we can get rid of, Bergeron in a third and like bring in Ullmark. Like that's not the type of price tag we're talking about here, man. This is premier talent. And to get premier talent, it's going to take a premier talent-esque return. So the Wings don't have the high-end draft capital that maybe the Devils or somebody have, but they have a really good prospect pool. And I would imagine that somebody like the Bruins, if they were to trade with the Red Wings, are not going to look at the Wings and go, you know what? And I don't think the Wings would want to either. We want the Red Wings NHL talent, right? The Wings NHL talent is not like, they're not going to trade Seider. They're not trading Raymond. They're not trading Larkin. I would have a hard time believing they're going to trade Cat after, extending him last year. And I have a hard time believing that would really even move the needle too much for Boston. So like you look at the talent on the NHL roster, I think if the Bruins hypothetically were to be interested in a Red Wings package, it would almost certainly be surrounded around, we want to improve our pipeline and make our depth better, which then brings in a bigger question, which is that even what Boston wants to accomplish? Do they want, you know what I mean? Do they want...
I don't think they'd want players they'd have to sit around and wait for to
right.
be ready.
Are the Bruins in a position where they want guys that are prospect caliber or still a couple of years away? Or do the Bruins want guys that are going to help their cup window today? And I'm not sure that lines up for what both teams are trying to accomplish in a potential deal like that.
Yeah, and that's why you hear a lot of these trade, like the one for Carolina, right? Like Marty Necas. That's right. That's perfect for both parties, right? They think they want to move on from Necas because he's going to need a big extension, or he's not going to need a big extension, but he's going to need a healthy extension. Yeah. And they're not sure he fits their play style. Meanwhile, they get to improve on their goaltending, which, their goaltending historically has always been solid. I always attributed that mainly to the way they play their game. But like, imagine the way they buff goalies with the way that they play, the style they play their games. If you combine that with Linus Ullmark, like, it's going to be an incredible duo. So I completely agree with you, where I'm not sure, with as much capital as the Red Wings have, I'm not sure they have the right kind of capital to make this trade work. Like, we talk about guys who are NHL ready right now. It's like Albert Johansson, Carter Mazur, Marco Kasper, Jonathan Berggren, obviously. Like, those are all guys, because you're not, like you said, you're not moving Raymond, you're not moving Seider. I doubt you're moving Edvinsson. So it's like, okay, who are you comfortable moving? And I do think the first round pick, the 15th overall, is in discussion, because Boston does not have a first round pick this year because they gave it to us on the Bertuzzi trade, which we then gave to Ottawa in the DeBrincat trade.
Boston doesn't have a pick until like the 4th. It's not even like, they just, like, they don't have a draft pick. I think they only have 4th, 5th, and 6th, or 4th, 6th, and 7th, or something like that. Like, they have zero draft capital. So I guess, then that's why, again, New Jersey kind of finds itself in these conversations.
And like, I sure, Jonathan Berggren, as much as I love the kid, you put him in the trade, is that going to have the same kind of weight as a Marty Necas trade? Yeah, I don't think so.
Berggren's turning into what, and I'm not comparing these players. I don't even want to say this anymore because people are going to be like, oh, I'm not comparing these players whatsoever. But in these trade conversations, he's turning into like what Vezina was, where it's just like, oh, in every single trade that we make, it's Berggren and who? It's like, at the end of the day, he's what, 24, 25, and spent the
same
entire
draft
year,
class.
Right, and got demoted from 2 years ago to last year and spent the entire year in the AHL, man. Like, he's not like a huge big-time needle mover for a guy like Ullmark. I think there is a trade market for him, but that, like, he's not going to be the centerpiece in a deal that gets you one of the best goalies in hockey.
And I do think, too, that I think anyone who would be happy to get Ullmark, but I think you'd be uncomfortable with what you'd have to give up to get him. And that's just, I think,
again, nobody's going to do it unless they know they can extend him for that exact reason.
And then let's talk about the extension too, because that's also going to be costly, right? You got him for one more year at $5 million. You assume that people are working under the assumption that they would have that conversation. There's a mutual interest in a contract. Yeah. That's what I was trying to say. And what would that contract look like, right? And goalies are so hard for me to predict because they're just their own beast. They're like their own complete different sect of hockey. And he currently makes $5 million, but he won a Vezina, and he's always been very good outside the playoffs. So that's actually a con I didn't mention. He does not have a very good track record in the playoffs with the Boston Bruins, but I'm not really concerned about that as a team that has not made the playoffs since 2016.
Right, let's get there first.
That's a tomorrow problem. Let's get there first. Exactly. So it does make me wonder, like, what that contract would look like. And I think it's probably going to be another guy like $9 million, right? Like, you look at what some of the best goaltenders in the league are making right now, and I think you're going to be paying out the butt for him. I really do. And that might also make you uncomfortable, but we'll see how uncomfortable it makes you when the team's winning a lot more games because of him. And again, can you afford him? I think you can, but there's your big splash move. Of course, that extension would kick in next year, not this year. It wouldn't affect this year's cap, but next year's going to be even tighter. So as we continue to move on with the opening of the cup window and making the playoffs, so starting the year following after this current contract expires, you're going to be paying him a lot of money, like $7, $8, $9 million, because he's making $5 now.
Yeah, man, he's gonna get he's gonna get a raise. Let me tell you, and it's going to be, again, I think he's going to be one of the higher paid goalies in the NHL. He probably deserves to be, and it's going to be quite a few years as well. And so I have no issue with that from him, to be honest. I have zero issue. Again, I mean, we talked about it last week, right? Like when you look at all of the teams that make it far into the postseason every year, all of them either have a really good goalie or Connor McDavid. So, like, Connor McDavid is not walking through that door. You're going to have to take a chance and pay a premier goaltender. I have zero issue giving him whatever money, really, he wants. It's not as long. It's as long as it's not, like 12 million a year, because as long as it's not some egregious overpay, I really have no issue with paying him and locking him up long term, because I strongly believe that that's a requirement to get this team into a true cup contention window. But the question is the price that it would have to take to trade him and the money. And does Boston even want to give him up? That is obviously the three big things that we've covered today.
Right. Like Connor Hellebuyck just signed a new contract this past year, and it pays him $8.5 million a year. So $9 million, I will say, is probably an overestimation. I've probably got a little ahead of myself, thinking mostly about Bobrovsky and Andrei Vasilevsky making $9.5 and $10 million. But if you're thinking $7-8 million range for a guy who plays about 40 games, would come to the Red Wings, would play more than that. I think that that's probably what you're looking at, and I think that's. I mean, I would do it to solve that goalie issue for the long term, but you just really got to be careful about what the cap situation is going to be going forward. But to solve that problem, I think it's worth it still. I'm less worried. This is weird. Like normally when we have these conversations, right, Scotty, we're more concerned about the cap implications, but because this is such a position of need, and you need 2 guys to fill this role, not 9, not 7, like you do at the other positions. I'm way more comfortable throwing that money at a position filled by 1 or 2 guys rather than 9. I'm more concerned with what it would take to acquire him via trade. The contract thing's like less of a problem for me with this one, just because of this is a guy who's going to be playing 60 minutes a night, 50-plus games a year for the Red Wings, at least.
Yeah, no, exactly a lockstep. Like I said, I really have no issue locking him up long term. That part of it doesn't really bother me at all.
All right. Good conversation. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow. I don't know what we're talking about yet, but we'll figure it out when we get there. Scotty, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. Want to let you guys know that Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national coverage of every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.